I'll try again. Yeah, I wanted to put the first question in to kind of reverse it a little bit because I noticed the agenda was a little light and didn't want any AMA with no questions. So, Wayne, I guess, what questions do you usually get asked about this? Like, what questions are you answering the most often?
Thanks, Sam. And would like to hear from others in the working group. I see Justin is also here, who's my partner in the working group. So thanks for asking, Sam. So there are probably three questions that come to mind, and I'll go into detail on each. But the first is, what's the purpose of cross-functional prioritization? So why are we doing it in the first place? What do I do if I have an issue or merge request and one of the types of bug, feature, or maintenance doesn't fit well enough? And the third is, why don't the dashboards match the issues and merge requests? So in terms of the first one, so what's the purpose of cross-functional prioritization? That wasn't well documented at the beginning. It was well documented about 2 weeks ago, and there's a merge request put in to do that. I'm going to just read through this here. To achieve and maintain an optimal balance of new features, security fixes, availability work, performance improvements, bug fixes, etc., via a framework that helps us drive conversations and alignment. Balance across these categories will allow GitLab to operate in a way that will allow us to meet revenue goals and maintain the stability of our platform. Second, give voice to everyone in the quad, which includes product management, development, quality, and UX, and to provide transparency into prioritization and work status to both internal stakeholders of the quad and external stakeholders so they can advocate for their work items. Let me pause there before I go on to the second one.
Can I maybe just, because I'm quite new to this, do we have a clarification what optimal balance is, or is this also the part of the work group to define what the optimal balance of new features, security fixes, etc. is?
Thanks, Victor. It's great follow-up. We don't. We started with what percentage we wanted to target for features, bugs, and maintenance, and undefined, where we don't know. And we removed all the goals and left it up to the quad to decide, except for undefined. We want to get undefined close to zero. And that's based on feedback from the group that different groups are going to have different goals. We may have guidelines in the future, but we now currently do not. So second is, what do I do if I have an issue or merge request and it doesn't fit in one of the types is recently changed based on feedback from across many teams, is adding, people should spend no more than 30 seconds trying to determine the type of an issue or merge request and make a best judgment based, in that short period of time. If they still think it doesn't fit, use the new type ignore, which was just added yesterday or the day before. We don't want a large number of those, but it should be a relatively small number. So then we know the difference between undefined because we haven't decided yet or haven't looked at it yet, and intentionally undefined because it doesn't fit in one of the others. And that's what type ignore is for. And lastly, why don't the dashboards match the issues and merge requests? This is frustrating to me as well. This comes up often, and it's generally because there's a 2 to 3 day delay from when an issue or merge request is updated to when those changes are reflected in Snowflake and SciSense. And various teams, data team, development, infrastructure, plan to collaborate to improve this. So that's one of the challenges where you see a different, sometimes slightly, sometimes more than slightly different list of issues represented in the dashboards than you do in the actual issues and merge requests themselves. And it's because of that 2 to 3 day data delay generally. Justin, I know it's early for you, so thanks for joining. Any other top questions that we've gotten in the working group?
No, hey Wayne, sorry. I think the why is the biggest one, and thanks for answering that. I think we've gotten feedback around, because we've made a lot of changes in terms of like process. And we've gotten feedback around, hey, isn't this like taking away autonomy? And one of the great things about working at GitLab is we empower team members to make good decisions and deliver results. And I think that my answer to that, and Wayne, you can answer differently. My answer to that is it's really about empowering team members with data. And this is one of the learnings we've had over the last several weeks is we didn't necessarily have data on a lot of these key things. So whether it was MRs weren't actually classified, they weren't labeled correctly or labeled at all. And then likewise issues, teams actually didn't know, oh, it turns out like my group is spending, 70% of their time on maintenance. I thought it was much lower. And so having that visibility, you sort of observe these conversations of EMs, PMs, SETs, product designers, having these really good conversations with, oh, should that be right? Should we actually be spending more time doing X or Y? And that's the intent. So we don't want to be super prescriptive about what ratio you should hit or how you should, structure your team or your group. But it's really the empowering you with data to make better decisions. So, but I think that's it. I think we got the big ones, Wayne. Thanks for asking. I guess thanks, Sam, for asking you to ask the questions.
So Tatiana, you've got a question. You want to verbalize?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of, I tried a bit hard to actually form it as a question because it's more like a comment, and maybe you have an advice for it. So in my team, we actually struggle with a merge request a number as a metric for this prioritization, because what happened like in the end of the cycle when we have a review and we see that, for example, 55% of our merge requests, they are for maintenance, but the fact what happened is that like they're super small, there are like some like changes to the documentation and so on, but they kind of affect number. And for example, we have like worked on one bug which resulted in one merge request, but we spent a big amount of time and it doesn't actually translate to the like numbers. So like the merge request number as a metric kind of not really works for our group. So like any suggestions what we can do about it?
It's great. It is definitely a great question. It is not directly related to cross-functional prioritization. We didn't change any of that with the merge request rate and like why it's there and how it's computed with this. But let's definitely still discuss. There's definitely a great question, and it's come up before. Is we I'll give you my opinions and on it. Is we see the merge request rate per group, not per person, but per group, to be a good predictor of iteration on how iterative the team is able to be. Knowing that if it's high, that might be great, or it might just be happenstance. And if it's low, it might be a concern, or it might not be a concern. It really depends on all the context that the team has, that those outside the team do not have. So it might be high because a team is doing a bunch of front-end pajamas changes, which tend to be small, or documentation changes, as you mentioned, or just otherwise the work that they're doing tends to naturally break up into reasonably sized small chunks of work that can be merged separately. Or a team might be doing might have people taking time off, right? Doing spike work where there's zero merge requests coming out of that spike work, but it's just to investigate something, which is very valuable, but doesn't end up with many, if any, merge requests. Or might have one bug, like you mentioned, that takes 2 weeks of work, right? Where you can't break it up further. It's always good to ask, the bigger it is, can it be broken up further? But that doesn't mean it can be. So it's about looking at it over time and having a good mixture of work so that the merge request rate is somewhat predictable. Somewhat predictable is not the right, understandable, but it's a signal for the team to look at if it's high or low to see if it's expected or not. And if it is expected, great. If it's not expected, then look into it. We do have an overall company goal. I think it's greater than or equal to 8 per team, average per team member. Some teams are higher, some teams are lower. I say for my teams, if it's higher, I ask them why. Was it expected and why? And if it's lower, I ask them if it was expected and if not, why. And sometimes I go, oh, wait, I didn't notice this. Maybe we can do this. Like, we're not breaking things up enough. One of the team leads said that we're not breaking things up into small enough pieces, and we can do more of that. Others, they basically said, yes, we know this. It's understood. The quad knows this. So the engineering manager, the product manager, UX and quality, and it's all expected. So thanks for asking, but here's the explanation, and I'm good with it. It's a really long diatribe. Apologies, Tatiana, but does that help?
Yeah, but probably I actually realized that I probably used the wrong name. The metric I was talking about is actually merge request per type. So this means that like every month when the quads review the dashboard, and I've actually linked the one for my group to the agenda, we see that the number of maintenance merge requests, it's always like above the 30%. It will be always 50%, just because like we have like a lot of small things to do. So like in this case, should we just kind of say that, yeah, like we know that this number is always huge, and we just kind of like need to adjust our expectations for it?
Yeah, I can maybe take a swing and answer. Yeah, so every group's going to be different. And I don't know your group super well. But if the quad is aligned that this is what we expect, then great. The thing to look at for future reviews is if it ever drifts significantly, and that's a signal to you and your counterparts, across R&D, that, hey, maybe we should look into what's going on. Like maybe something happened, maybe there's a bunch of bugs that came in or something like that, that can maybe inform you making different prioritization decisions. But if you look at it and the data is what it is, but you agree and it sort of passes like a gut check, then great.
It's similar to the others. Yeah, and sorry, I went off on it. I misunderstood Tatiana on a very often asked question, but this is not the one that you asked about MR rate. You're asking about, like you said, the goals. We don't have goals right now or guidelines. Similar to issues, we don't have guidelines for MRs either. We want to understand them, where the trends are, as Justin said, but not. But if it's high, it should be what the quad expects for the group. And if it's different than what they expect, they should ask themselves why. But it's up to the quad.
Okay, thank you.
John, you want to verbalize? Looks like you're typing there.
Yeah, like I don't know how relevant this is to groups outside of, or stages outside of plan, but I would consider anything that is in service of a feature to be of type feature, even if it resembles maintenance work or bug work. In my opinion, it's not a bug unless it's a defect in the system, and the feature is not yet in the system until the feature flag is defaulted to on, and therefore anything that's in service of a feature should be considered type feature. And I don't know, Tatiana, that might affect your numbers and how you would label MRs. It kind of would from a plan perspective anyway.
Justin, I see you typing there. You want to verbalize?
No, I'm just confirming what John said. I spot checked dozens of MRs over the last several months and found that case to be true, often true. So a MR, when you trace the issues and you kind of see what was going on, it looked, smelled, tasted, etc., like feature work, but was tagged as maintenance. And I agree with John, like that should be feature work, even though it was like a refactor as some example, or some other change like that. And logically, it kind of makes sense why the person tagged it as maintenance, but in reality, it's in the spirit of implementing a new feature for a customer.
It's probably inertia as well. Like if we go through the backlog and mark things as type maintenance, but we have to do that maintenance in order to ship a feature, the temptation is probably just to leave the maintenance label on. So like, that's why I said, like, if I'm looking at plan numbers for 15.3 and they're out of proportion, the first place I would look would be, are any of these MRs like actually feature MRs because they had to be done to release the feature, even if they were originally tagged as something else?
Great. Any other questions or comments before we break? Very much appreciate you having questions for the group so we could discuss Tatiana and Sam. Good stuff. Spawned some great discussions.
Thanks, Wayne.
Cheers. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.